Welcome to another Dead or Alive Last Round Lounge with the 2MK team. On this Black Friday, we are, once again, fighting to figure out our holds, our rises, and various defense things. The lounge is set up as it normally is with 2MK marked. You can find it that way. We are enforcing a limit on how good your connection can be. But overall, as long as you fit it at all, you're free to join us. This week, free characters are Bayman and probably someone else on the roster who is currently already free for us. You're likely therefore to see a lot of zoning style play, new experiments with holds, and, most importantly, blocking and similar things, especially given our theme for the week, Fighting Tired. One of the main problems of Fighting Tired in 3D games is the fact that it's more difficult to judge distances. This is true for humans as a general thing, but if you're really tired, this can seriously mess with you. As it's similar to being inebriated, i.e. if you drink a lot, it's not that different than being too sleepy to fight properly, but it doesn't have to be actually sleepy. Anything along those lines is about the same, just being too tired to properly judge distances, and therefore, in 3D games where the background changes, the camera changes, the lighting changes, you have a lot more to work out when it comes to deciding whether or not you should do something. Coming up with tricky attacks, therefore, is relatively dependent on how well you can bait your opponent into doing something by your spacing, as this game doesn't have a whole lot of other ways to open people up, given how the throw system and other movement works.
Not too bad.
This week, therefore, we will see a lot of adaptation to this defense style and movement based around it, but note that yes, our players are somewhat tired, even though, obviously, yesterday was technically off. We know how it goes. Anyone who generally travels for Thanksgiving
Come and fight.
is off to family somewhere. But let's spend our time today as viewers watching the space between two characters, as it's going to be one of the largest things deciding how matches go now that all players, at least so far in the lounge, are familiar, or relatively familiar, with both their characters and the systems that underlie how the game plays.
human.
No!
I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
Hayate's good wake-up game, particularly in lag, means that you don't often want to be so close to him after knocking him down. To have a good wake-up game in this game mostly means that you are good at converting any rising hit you can do into either big damage or relatively good control. You can notice this sort of thing fairly quickly by simply observing how often you try to pressure the opponent on their wake up and get beaten out. Particularly if you get beaten out in a way that changes the scenario away from your favor.
ready, fight!
Not too bad.
Let's get this party!
Face your fate.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight!
While Zack is a relatively strong character once he gets started, he does not have a lot of lunging moves that actually take him forward and are difficult to counter or read, meaning that the situation he ends up in is often whiffing buttons right in front of the opponent while fishing, leading to zoning characters like Rachel or footsie characters like Helena having a lot of control over that space in front of them. He does have good mix-ups, and once he's gotten close enough he can duck through things and so on. But up against characters who have good strikes starting from low stances,
Now do you understand, my dear?
and strong mids that go into natural flows, it can be a little bit hard to get started.
I don't have time to play games with you. Come and fight.
Get ready, fight! ready, fight!
In situations like these, where the footsies part of this game come in. It can be a little hard to understand at first, but most of the footsies of the game, from far, is based on convincing your opponent that you are going to be approaching, perhaps ready to start a move, and encouraging them to try to check you with buttons. Ceasing your advance at a particular moment will cause that button to whiff and allow you to whiff punish it. But this brings us back to what we were saying at the beginning of stream. In order to do this sort of thing, you have to be able to measure distance. You have to be able to measure it fairly well. When you're tired playing unfamiliar games, this becomes really difficult.
Now do you understand, my dear?
Since most of us are more likely to want to do things than to maybe bait things, especially when sometimes that maybe baiting does not result in what we want, the situation can get somewhat complicated. Greedy games are even more difficult in this sense because when you are standing in neutral,
I'll make sure you regret this.
Get ready, fight!
you cannot count on crouch block as a standard easy way to deal with things. In most other games, the overhead style attack is very telegraphed, and therefore you can just crouch block and deal with all the lows. In 3D games, your best bet is normally to be blocking standing, meaning that you're often at least somewhat vulnerable to low attacks. For most characters, these lows don't lead to too much, or if they do, it's a specific, relatively slower low attack that does so.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight!
It is partially for this reason that these games often have a low parry even if they don't necessarily have other kinds, i.e. many characters in Tekken, if not all of them, have low parry even though not all of them have basically standing mid parry.
I don't have time to play games with you. Come and fight.
Get ready, fight!
One easy way to think of this as a beginner is that if your opponent was close enough that you felt like he would not be able to react in time to do the hold, that is when holds are useful. And when they are far enough away from you that you feel as if you could see it coming, that's probably the range where you want to wait for an attack and hit a button. It's counterintuitive, but you have to get used to it at least somewhat. This isn't to say that you can't hit holes at those spaces, but you do have to build up a lot better idea of what your opponent wants to do at the spacings before you can try it. Since you get punished relatively heavily for being wrong and don't get any real damage if you're slightly off. Whereas, at least if you did an attack, you may get a little clip of damage worth as a result. However, once you're out at the really far ranges, and you think your opponent is going to approach, holds become a good thing again. The difficulty is to only respond when you are relatively confident, which means that the window for doing so is actually fairly small. You don't really get more time to get a good chance at a hold by being further away, because when you think you should be able to hold, it might be that your opponent is not doing what you think they are.
Get ready, fight!
For a human. Now for business. Face your fate.
Get ready, fight!
Helena's advantages over Christy are actually somewhat based on this. Christy does have long moves, but they're fairly telegraphed and they're mostly mids. What she does have in spades though is the ability to move in very quickly while extending more of a check than you'd expect.
Get ready, fight!
Meaning that she is very hard to keep out with buttons in the straight sense. And often going to do moves that will force you to block, and then allow her to continue. Once you do have her away from you though, it's relatively easy to control the space in front of you with enough patience. This is a character who is generally trying to get in on you, so often there's not much requirement for you to actually try to get in on her. You're mostly looking for those moments where Christy has found a way to reach her spot and stick to you.
no business fighting here. Come and fight.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight! KO! Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight! KO! Winner!
Not too bad.
I am ready. Face your fate.
Get ready, fight!
This one we know better. Kasumi can be played in the same style as Christy, but she does tend to have less options for it. Just a few. However, as soon as you try to go in on her, her options become approximately the same. As you're often going to get counter hit, and therefore she does not need the same lunging space as Christy tends to have. Helena has multiple ways of moving forward without causing herself to worry about this, and covering the space in front of her while she moves. The sharp, downward strikes of her fighting style tend to cover most of the ground without creating too much of a whiff punishable situation directly. In fact, she can often manage this sort of match with just that sort of thing. When Kasumi switches to using her many high attacks, Helena therefore also has a lot of moves that slide under them with the lows.
I'm sorry. I must go on.
Aw, hiccup. Oh, no, there we are.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
Loser. Is that the best you can do?
Unlike the first two, Ayane is a character that Helena can technically go in on. Her moves, despite being effective, have a much longer wind-up than the others. And Helena's mids and similar tend to be more toward the lower side, meaning that they catch a lot of Ayane's moves. Once again, the main thing in the fight is patience. Once Helena gets advantage, she doesn't want to press it too quickly, unless you're really familiar with either the opponent or Helena as a character to get really good pressure. Since, as you can see, being close to Ayane means that you have to deal with all of her wake-up game, which, while not as strong as Hayate's, tends to lead into advantageous situations for her. Consistently enough that you care. This is compounded by the fact that Helena's throws are usually not that good. It even tells you so when you try to pick her. For getting damage or changing situations other than playing defensively to get out of corners and similar. In other words, Helena's advantages in throws in pressure are a little lacking. One of the few characters where, unless she's fairly got a read on the opponent, throwing is generally a situation in which Helena wants to move away after succeeding at it.
Get ready, fight!
Don't make me laugh.
As always, mirror matches are some of the most interesting
Don't have time
and
to play
difficult
games with
to
you.
explain
Face your fate.
fights in fighting games. But we can see more or less the same sort of flow happening. Helena is not that great at pressure. Meaning that pressuring Helena with Helena on either side from here is not necessarily the best option. Note that our Helena in blue, for example, normally, once the combo is done, which can take a while, either stops attacking or is at relative risk for trying. It is one of the few times in the match so far that you see them taking any serious damage. This is often true for characters who are so good at playing neutral. You don't generally want them to be able to win in neutral and then just brutalize the opponent on wake up, get back to the same situation and start over.
What happened to all that spirit you had a moment ago?
Come and fight.
Face your fate.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight!
You tasted victory.
According to the look of this one, it might be a little laggy, but probably not that bad. Home court advantage, huh?
Your heart's gonna be all mine, baby.
Come and fight.
Get ready, fight!
As mentioned before, Zac does work decently if you're playing him with good defense, and if you're playing him while knowing how exactly to fish for the right attack. For Rachel though, this is not so hard to deal with. She has good range, a lot of evasive style moves, and strong throws. Above all else, this is probably the most important part of the main flow of the game. He's not super easy nor super hard to zone out, but understanding when he's going to launch a lunging attack to beat your zoning can be a little hard. And as noted, he's relatively sticky, as in once he's close to you, you have to be a lot more careful than you do with certain other characters. Watching for your opportunities though, evading some of his advancing attacks, and taking your advantage with either your stronger strikes or your throws can get Rachel fairly far. So from Zac's side, this becomes a play much like that. Knowing that your opponent will usually feel as if they have a chance to hit you based more so on you approaching them than specifically on you launching an attack, since the attack itself is fairly hard to react to. Zac simply needs to understand the most likely button the opponent will use to check him and hold that button. This doesn't work so well on Rachel either, as she does have a lot of different directions she can attack from, and she can use both kicks and punches. This match we know reasonably well as well. Even with relatively high mobility, Kasumi is relatively easy for Rachel to block for longish periods of time. The problem is knowing when in that long string of things to stop blocking. Fortunately, Kasumi's relatively long range means that even if you do check her, sometimes this is not necessarily to her advantage, but it's not terrible. Due to her high variability, this is partially what forces the long stinches of blocking, as it's very unlikely that you'll be able to easily recognize what you need to do against her quickly.
Face your fate. Come and fight.
Get ready, fight! 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 Winner!
Now do you understand, my dear? Let the red rose of blood bloom forth.
Come and fight.
Get ready, fight!
just because I'm little.
Now for business. Come and fight.
Get ready, fight!
Rachel does have to worry a little bit more in this matchup, due to Chrissy's ability to maneuver around her in certain spaces. However, missing any of these maneuvers means that Chrissy tends to be very throwable.
Get ready, fight!
One generally doesn't have to spend all that much time learning precisely when to do it either. They tend to be relatively telegraphed compared to most characters. If you don't think you can reach with the throw, then punch her.
Get ready, fight!
A character with a good push, but often pushes herself back out if she gets blocked for too long. Fortunately, when she does get you, she has a large amount of control, which helps a lot with that feeling.
Get ready,
It's much more likely that she will be able to make the player impatient about taking their turn, and therefore get away with a lot more things that way. Chrissy is a master of making beginners think that she is going to stop and that they get to do something and stop blocking. What she's not so good at is making sure she doesn't get thrown while she does all that. While she does occasionally get some good counters off of going for something unconventional in this situation, they're normally not great damage either.
Not too bad.
Chrissy can take advantage of this by going for specific lows, which won't really lead to much damage but will help her with repositioning, and going for throws herself. Once she's gotten you into the mindset that she is going to keep coming and therefore you should wait for your turn, you may find yourself facing off that problem. Of course, she can always tech out of the throw, you can tech out of the throw. If you're really on point, then a lot of the time it's not going to be a problem.
Face your fate. Yeah, I'm here to fight.
get ready, fight!
Mila has a similar style overall. She's just better at getting started. Not by a lot either. If you don't want to block, this character is going to destroy you, as she just more or less keeps punching. Unlike that, she can normally stick to you without necessarily needing to use the same longer strikes and flip moves. Meaning you have to be really careful about when you let go of block.
Get ready, fight!
For those who are unfamiliar, remember that you generally don't want to block crouching in 3D games, as this will cause you to get hit by basically every mid. All the attacks you're used to thinking of as normal, aimed at your stomach, become functionally aimed at your head, and regardless of whether or not you actually have your guard up, it doesn't help you.
Let's fight again soon, okay?
This one might be a little laggy, let's hope not.
I'm ready to fight.
I don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
Now, Tora has one of the most interesting fighting styles in this game, mechanically speaking.
Get ready, fight!
She has a lot of moves that you would give you the impression that they should have knockback, but don't. Allowing her to be a very sticky character, she gets to stay close to you even though she is managing to land hits that would otherwise send you flying. Some of them will even cause her to go off slightly to the side of you when she strikes, making it harder to judge distance or knowing what to do directly afterwards. Interestingly, a lot of these moves don't do so much damage, but if you understand this character's combos, that's not going to matter to you very much. She does have a lot of mid-combo mix-ups that you can learn how to get out of though. One good way to think about it is that her combo strings get to keep going not until they naturally end and the opponent gets to block and then has to be opened up again, but rather that the combo itself goes into a following mix-up a lot of the time. Sometimes the mix-up is something you could block, i.e. the opponent will go for something slow that could be blocked entirely.
Sorry! I'm so sorry I won the fight!
But you can keep on pushing forward. Like literally pushing forward. It does often make her a relatively difficult character to grab onto, as in she's not easy to throw like Christy
I
is,
don't have time to play games with you.
Get ready, fight!
as there's a high chance that she is going to keep going rather than stopping at all, and that in so doing she will either hit you because she's faster and slightly advantaged even though she was attacking, or move out of the way of your throw in some way.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight!
Taste of victory.
This match we're indirectly familiar with, and have seen on the stream a couple of times. This is functionally even easier than dealing with Kasumi directly, as while Phase 4 does have a lot more trickery, she doesn't have as much range and is mostly just blocked, with your main problem coming from when she is going for lows and getting stuff off of those lows. Her teleportation shenanigans, however, can make it a little bit stressful when you're watching to see where she is on screen, cause you to flinch and lose control of your main game plan. Basically, that's the way to think of her. She's a character who's very difficult to build an offensive game plan against, forcing you to play defensively, and therefore be at her mercy if your defensive skills aren't up to full.
Get ready, fight!
This also, of course, allows her to beat you up for long periods of time. A good sense of when and how to hold, combined with certain timings for throws, however, can help you quite a bit against her. With high speed and a lot of moves that are functionally safe, she is by nature a super oppressive character. But if you're not really the sort of person that is freaked out or bothered by that, your best bet is normally to wait for her to make a mistake and do whatever combo, or rather block string, leaves you at what you consider to be your greatest advantage. Right here, for example, for Rachel. There are things that Phase 4 can do after that particular block string, but they're not great things. For the most part, she has to respect that and get back into the correct position afterward to get started again. This is not an advantage to Rachel at all, as she deals no damage during this process. But depending on the player, they can remain relatively comfortable while this is going on, meaning that they can just keep playing the match at their own pace. Rachel's good throw range and throw damage means that even when being bullied around by Phase 4, there's at least a chance that she'll be able to just hold on. In often cases, quite literally. Phase 4 can, of course, as you've just seen, use her own speed to get throws on Rachel by simply making the Rachel player think that she must defend, without hitting any buttons. But Rachel does have a lot of range compared to quite a few characters, meaning that she does have the chance, at least, to pull this off.
Out of my way.
Face your fate.
I'll make sure you regret this.
Get ready, fight!
too bad.
No way. Face your fate.
Get ready, fight!
Once again, we see the base shift. In order to get a clear advantage on Ayane on a knockdown, Helena normally needs to reposition rather than going for the attack. How exactly to reposition is up to the player, so it's not as if we have a specific suggestion, do this thing, do this thing. What we will generally tell you obviously is don't just try hitting her, because if you get clipped, even if you've only taken a little bit of damage, chances are that you were not blocking low, even if you expected it. And Ayane can position herself in ways that give her relative advantage off of her no wake-up kick.
Get ready, fight!
There's the advantage in question.
Get ready, fight!
Now, as you've been seeing, it is not guaranteed that Ayane will have a pure advantage, but this is also partially because she tends to expect the other player to either block that move, or having been hit by it, to do a specific type of thing.
Don't make me laugh.
Come and fight.
Yeah, I'm here to fight.
Get ready, fight!
When playing more defensively, Mila's weaving and bobbing and footwork, like most boxers at Judith's pet, can cause the opponent to miss or misunderstand where their attack should be placed. Rachel has long striking attacks which tend not to be as bothered by this, as the Mila player would have to be the one reacting to the range that Rachel is putting herself at the last moment. But Rachel does have a relatively slower approach compared to Mila's options, meaning that Mila basically has to stick to Rachel as long as she can when she has a chance, and try to set up a good long-range attack. Not necessarily with the intention of doing a ton of damage, but making sure that Rachel can't. Since she is also one of the characters most capable of getting a strong advantage off of poking at Rachel after a missed strong attack, even perfectly spaced,
Let's fight again soon, okay?
it means that without either zoning or strong approach tactics, it can be really hard to handle the character without shifting around your flow. Rachel can, however, use her twirl in particular timings, usually without the intention of ever making contact with their attacks, and then twirling out of the way of any counterattack from Mila. But we appear to be back to Naotora.
I'm ready to fight.
Come and fight.
Get ready, fight!
Rachel has good buttons for dealing with the situation and is one of the few characters who can sort of grab Naotora without worrying too much about it. But, like every other character, she does have to pay a lot of attention. She's just one of the characters that gets the option of throw or block, whereas most characters don't quite get away that easily. Naotora is not all that strong against zoning, which is usually helpful, but she also moves quickly enough that Rachel doesn't get a lot of opportunities to do this. She's unlikely to be able to set up the zoning situation as easily as she can on other characters, and has to more or less rely on the moments where Naotora is trying to be tricky to get started.
Get ready, fight!
Most of this there's not strictly speaking a way out of if you can't hold it, but you can, of course, just let yourself block for long periods until you're comfortable. This is true for nearly every character in every fighting game ever. Unless they have strong command grabs, you could just block until you got used to them. It wouldn't win you the match, but the feelings of stress and discomfort that certain characters easily cause can be pretty bad.
Sorry, sorry, sorry!
Our standard Rachel Hitomi matchup can be either a flow very similar to both characters trying to zone each other, quote unquote, or a clash of long-range kicks.
Get ready, fight!
While Hitomi can stick relatively close to other characters, she benefits a lot more from this after landing a successful first hit. Because unlike some of the other characters in the game, while she can punch quite a lot, and she really shouldn't or can't be easily punished for doing so, she has sort of the same problem, quote unquote, as Christy. If you finish her strings, it creates a distance that is not always advantageous to her. As long as the opponent was blocking, they can feel a little more comfortable in the idea that, yeah, you are done now. I can watch and see if you're the sort of player that tries to go in even harder after that, and if that's your general MO, then I'll go for an attack. That said, Hitomi does have a lot of good attacks from motion, and she doesn't telegraph that much. Her main disadvantage in this matchup being that dealing with Rachel's throw range is a little bit harder for her, compared to the throw range of most other characters, that is. Rachel is one of the characters in the game who can respond to the potential for a further attack from her side by throwing, and it will end up probably catching with the whiff. The range also prevents her from being able to easily do a lot of her sideways repositions, meaning that she has to go for riskier leaping moves or back off entirely.
Way. We fight!
Get ready, fight!
Against Ayane, Hitomi's sideways repositions tend to be a little more helpful. While Ayane's moves do twirl, the strike zones on them don't always twirl as much as you'd think with her. I guess technically you'd win by timeout if your opponent kept doing this forever.
Get ready, fight!
Tsumi is generally a relatively technical character, and therefore doesn't do the hugest amount of damage per hit, but she does have a lot of hit opportunities compared to many other characters, and almost all of them convert fairly well, meaning that in total she tends to end up doing around the same amount of damage. She does tend to lack some of the more explosive damage numbers, though, you could say. And in return for it, she gets a lot of that consistency. As you can see, most of her moves are sharp and pretty hard to stop. Quickly leading into frustration at constantly more or less getting beat up by full combos and similar things. Marie Rose does better against Mila than most characters because she can avoid so many of Mila's checks. Forcing the character to use her mids, such as the knee and that mid punch you've just seen, to prevent things like Marie Rose's rolling attack and certain types of quick approach that don't have anything to do with the rolling. This doesn't really limit Mila that much in terms of her ability to stop someone from coming in, but it does make her do attacks that are easier to whiff punish if they miss, and don't necessarily automatically progress forward in that miss situation. There are quite a few moves in this game that will, as you can see here, continue forward whether or not they actually hit. There are other moves where if you did not hit, you do not get the same type of forward movement until the character has recovered. This constant, difficult to read and unconventional approach is easy-ish to stop when you understand Marie Rose fairly well and have good holds. But Mila relies relatively heavily on strikes to get her main damage. She doesn't really want to be spending a lot of time doing holds in order to get advantage. Nor is Marie Rose really a character where this is going to help you a lot. It's similar to Kasumi where, yeah, probably if you know her really well you can do it, but we're not talking about that level of play at the moment.
Sure you regret this. Prepare!
Get ready, fight!
Rachel is also able to use, at least a little bit, the fact that Ammonia of Ayane's twirls, except her longest kick ones, are easily counter-twirled, more or less. Moving in and out of her strike range is also helpful here. Not necessarily because it is easy to get out of Ayane's attacks, but simply that she doesn't get to stay close enough to keep most of her real mix-ups going. Making her one of the few characters in the game who Rachel actually wants to twirl, like early / mid-screen, that sort of character. Most of the time Rachel does not want to do this because the opponent will just follow up with something. But when Ayane is decently far away, and you see any move coming, it's decently sure that you can just twirl out of it. Whereas with other people you have to worry. This will make Ayane hesitate long enough to possibly be zoned, but don't count on it. When she's close, of course, she's quite sticky and has a lot of sideways range on her moves, meaning that you don't really get to twirl anything.
Sure you regret this.
Get ready, fight!
Come and fight.
We fight!
Get ready, fight!
Hitomi's moves with those creative hitboxes we mentioned earlier are also usually the ones that don't really have combos. They're good for getting advantage, repositioning afterwards, and potentially frustrating the opponent. But the reason they don't lead to much damage is because of the way they work. They tend to have strong knockdowns or stuns that she can't take advantage of based on her recovery being too long. Often the case with her kicks.
Get ready, fight!
But there is something to be said for a character with a large consistency in their damage. The relatively long hit stun allows her to take control of situations and hold her calm fairly easily, or rather for the player to hold their calm. Spending less time worrying about whether or not your combos are going to work because of small timing or height differences or something, and more time thinking about what you want to do right after them.
Not too bad.
But it looks like we are back to Christy and her lunging in close strikes. This is not so difficult for Hitomi because, once again noted, once Hitomi gets started, there's not much chance of her combos failing. Unlike Rachel, she lacks that consistent throw range required to make sure she can punish Christy doing all of these things, and can't always react with the same speed toward the same places. By extension, since she also doesn't tend to play as much of a zoning game, she will tend to be standing closer to Christy in the first place, making it harder to get away from some of the things she does. Unfortunately, after her holds, she does have a larger advantage against Christy than most characters do. Meaning that Christy has to be more daring about how she launches certain attacks.
Get ready, fight!
And a little more creative too. For example, here you see a lot more aerial kicks,
Ready, fight!
and kicks in general. Hitomi's relatively good movement speed though makes it harder to deal with this for Christy than it normally would be.
My fists are on fire.
Come and fight.
When faced with the same style, therefore,
Get ready, fight!
well, let's assume she is faced with the same style. No, not quite. But as I was saying, in general, when faced with the same style, Rachel's longer kicks and overall more devoted zoning strikes means it's a little bit easier for her to hold control in that long-ish range.
Get ready, fight!
Making her have to worry more about Chrissy's creativity in close. When Christy has forgone all of her lunging attacks, all of her basically, I'm going to jab you with my snake hands strikes in favor of kicks, Rachel can treat her like Ayane somewhat.
You're not even worthy of being my toy.
ready, fight!
You're pretty good. For a human. Prepare. Us.
Get ready, fight!
Against both Hitomi and Rachel, Ayane's advancing forward kicks are one of her strongest weapons. Exactly how to punish them can be difficult to judge. They cover a lot more space than you'd expect and force you to go at least somewhat on the offensive. As we noted prior, she is one of those characters who is really well suited to doing a move first and following it with something very slightly different or with a slightly different timing. Unlike her sister, she's relatively linear about it and therefore has to control spacing a lot more. And once she is committed, if you've decided, well, no, I'm not even going to try to challenge that, I'm just going to block, then most of the time you'll end up fine. But this is what she wants. When she's gotten close enough, she can twirl and get advantage that way. So, for the most part, you're better off at least trying to figure out how to challenge it.
Don't make me laugh.
This isn't to say necessarily that you should try to challenge it every time, but at least think about it while you're blocking it.
Come and fight.
We fight.
Get ready, fight! Get ready, fight! Get
way.
Guess I can do this.
Get ready, fight!
Seems that Brad has made the connection itself drunk.
Get ready, fight!
Oh, okay. Looks like I might have cleaned up a little bit. The quote-unquote secret of Drunken Master offense is functionally that you can't use any given thing that the character does as a signal for what they're going to do next. The downside of this being that, in order to be this unconventional, it may involve taking a little longer to do your moves, or not getting maximum damage out of them when you do them. The unorthodox / hard to read part of it may of course help with this. And obviously the hope is that it will offset any disadvantages you get.
Don't make me laugh.
This is not as helpful against Rachel. Brad Wong often needs to just do moves that would cause Rachel to want to attack
Come and fight.
and miss,
Guess I can do
because
this.
there he has a fair number of options. Similarly, making her go for zoning attacks that he holds can be helpful as well. But since he's not really able to get in on her that easily compared to most other characters, and when he does, it's not super damaging. Her biggest worry is the delays between his moves, giving her the feeling that it's time to take her own turn. For the most part though, Rachel should just, whenever she thinks there's a turn to take, just twirl, because most of Brad's moves do not easily counter this move, while still doing really good damage. And since he's unconventional and therefore somewhat difficult to throw, she can either move because she's absolutely confident in the strike, i.e. punch him, and if she's not, but thinks that might be a delay, twirl out of the way, because if there is an attack that will follow, as you can see, the very nature of his style means that it generally can't be too dangerous in terms of how it's sweeping. It doesn't necessarily trap well. He does, of course, as you've just seen demonstrated, have moves that do trap. The problem is managing to damage Rachel with them, at least consistently damage her. From Brad's side, therefore, the better option is to approach Rachel as if you are really drunk, as if you don't care whether or not you get close to her or not. This often gives you enough time to block some things she does, and honestly, while Brad is not the strongest character in terms of punishing, once the opponent is close enough to him that he can get them to even block his moves, his game plan has started. Unfortunately, every now and again, she's still gonna get punched in the gut. This character is therefore easier to play when you are literally less caring about it.
You're pretty good. For a human.
There's sort of a middle ground where if you are too technical, trying too hard, or learning too much, then you are thinking too much while you're playing Brad Wong, and this makes you ineffective. On the other hand, if you don't know how to use any of his strategies or which moves you have available to you, then technically not thinking isn't any real help either. So your hope is to ascend through all of the days of stressing yourself about learning all Brad's little nuances until you are back to the point where you cannot think at all.
I can't avoid this fight.
Guess I can do this.
Get ready, fight!
Kasumi's options against Brad are often the same. She wants to at least try to quote-unquote zone him, but unlike Rachel, she actually has to do moves first to get started. And this often telegraphs her intentions. Looks like it's a little too laggy for Brad to take too much advantage of that at the moment, but it might clear up. From Brad's side, therefore, he's mostly trying to stand just outside of her range and watch what the starting thing is. She does have the ability to vary it, but he's an unconventional enough character that he doesn't always care. When he's uncertain and doesn't feel like making the read, he should mostly just block. Brad's main problem is, interestingly, the opposite. Kasumi's speed overwhelms his drunken style, meaning that if he's too close to her, she doesn't really have to worry about his unconventional style, as she never really plans to defend. She'll just hit buttons until whatever time she comes out on top. As she's not the easiest character in the game to actually land holds on, it's a bit more difficult to take advantage of this directly as well. And obviously, as you can see from the stutter, the lag couldn't have been helping. Either side, technically, except that for Kasumi you just have to mash buttons more or less. Ayana's strong twirls and decent mids make this difficult for Brad to deal with directly. Ayana players' general best bet is to stick to those sorts of things, attack relatively head-on, not spend a lot of time using her more difficult to target moves, such as her flip kick, or even her, let's call it drill.
Get ready, fight!
That's a little laggy this time. As you can see there, Brad can start moves out of certain forms of block stun or certain situations where normal characters would, by trying to do a move in that space, open themselves up to another hit, whereas he basically does not. You can think of it as evasive hitboxes, but they only really work if the opponent is already committed to a relatively large attack, so therefore Ayane simply has to never do that. She should mostly try to get close to him, poke and spin, and make sure that he can't use too many of his own tricks to keep out of her way. When the two are close together, Brad's best bet is his lows. Obviously one can't overuse them, but as a whole, in a sort of panicky situation, it's probably better to use the lows than not, as even if they are countered, Ayane's counters for them tend to make her do less damage. This is particularly effective at the end of a space where the two have just been pushed a little bit too far apart for Ayane's twirls to really hit, since after most of her twirls she doesn't have any really strong lows. She twirls into mids and highs most of the time. She also has lows, but they don't tend to hurt all that much.
You gotta fight better than that.
Sure you regret this.
Us!
Get ready, fight!
Not too bad. Let's see how strong you are. Us!
Get ready, fight!
See! Here I come! See!
We are coming to the end of our stream. This, in fact, may not even be a fight.
I'm sure you regret this.
No way!
Get ready, fight!
Nope, there we go. But either way, we are likely to not be going on too much longer. Although how much longer exactly is a little bit up in the air.
Get ready, fight!
With the current status of our work on our bots, this is more likely to be a semi-regular fixture on Fridays going forward. In other words, expect Dead or Alive last round launches more often than not. Particularly given that in about 3 months, which is really only 10 to 12 of these, Dead or Alive 6 should be released. There have been talk about some new mechanics, some slightly easier mechanics to understand, but most of the playstyles of the characters are unlikely to change too much. You might get balance things, but balance things don't matter as much to beginner players who don't necessarily know all of the frame data and specific advantage of one thing or another in the first place.
Get ready, fight!
If not too much has changed though, it should be possible to use at least recognition ability, like I've seen this move before, and therefore am
Get ready, fight!
relatively comfortable with knowing how far it reaches, or I could easily adjust to whatever change in reach it was given, and so on. We also don't know whether or not that game will be using a similar free plus sold characters model, but you can certainly use this game for free and use that to figure out whether or not you find Dead or Alive as a series worth your attention.
Fists are on fire.
Every 2 to 3 weeks, the free characters in this game do rotate, meaning that you can check back about once a month even if you have basically decided not to spend any money on it, and see who's available for you to play and learn. There are, however, always at least 4 characters available to you,
Here I go.
plus those 2 giving you 6 in total.
Get ready, fight!
And from there it's just a matter of internet connection. Everything else about the game is more or less cosmetic DLC stuff.
Get ready, fight!
And we don't expect a lot of changes in mechanics, just more so stages, and things like meter or automatic moves that might actually be around the same, if not better, than some of the mechanics for comebacks and so on that the game uses now. So, you can worry a little less about it. If you've been hearing anything about it that way, and hearing complaints or worries of players who are fans of this game, you can think of it fairly simply. Not every character in this game has a good, decent, or strongish combo by just hitting the punch button a lot. Sometimes they have to hit the punch button with different directions involved, throwing a kick button occasionally, etc. and you might have to actually know it. Meaning that you can't necessarily just pick up and play every character by mashing a certain thing. The impression they've given us so far from the description is that they will have some more or less auto combo of that type allowed, that pretty much every character you do this thing and you will get a combo, which is decent for helping you deal with situations where you know you have advantage, your opponent has made a terrible mistake and you get to hit them, but you don't know the correct combo to hit them with. And there are few things worse than leaving yourself vulnerable because you forgot the precise sequence of buttons you need to press at what speed. To punish your opponent for their mistake. The other thing we have been hearing about is the application of meter in some form, but what exactly form that is coming in is still a little bit up in the air. There's the implication that it will more or less be like a super meter from every other fighting game that you normally see with those sorts of things. The simplistic version: build up this much meter, get access to this special move once. 3D games tend to use a different system where once you are low on health,
Now for business.
you automatically get this option, but you could argue that those two things are not necessarily better or worse than the other. Depending on how you build up this meter, obviously. And depending on what properties the moves in question have. So while we expect them to be fairly damaging, that's interesting to say, given that honestly if you put yourself in the wrong situation, everything in this game is really damaging. Most of what is deciding how hard you get hit is how much of a mistake you made before you took the damage.
Get ready, fight!
Next week Monday, of course, you can join us for our mashing battle lounge in Street Fighter V. And on Tuesday, Guilty Gear fans can join us for the Tuesday train. Once again, these are US East Coast lobbies. Generally tend to be loser stays on, except in the case of the Street Fighter, as this is not an option there.
Come and fight.
On Wednesday, we'll most likely be having Sandbag Casuals, but exactly which game, Street Fighter V or Under Night In-Birth, its latest, is still undecided. Almost certainly going to be decided sometime this weekend though, so you can check back at the end of Monday's stream to find out if you happen to be interested in specifically one or the other. Our Monday streams normally ending at 9 Eastern approximately. Next Thursday we'll be back with Dragon Ball Fighters Kame House. For all you fans of Goku, and Goku. And it's super unlikely that we'll have anything for the next DBFZ plot, as we have to do a lot of finalization in order to get into the last of our offense series. You can find the other entries in such series or our bots for Street Fighter V at our website 2-mk.org. With our original Street Fighter V bots at 2-mk.org/bots and our DBFZ bots at you'd expect 2-mk.org/dbfz-bots. But as noted, since there will probably not be bot content for next week, Friday we will be once again having Dead or Alive last round.
Here I go.
Get ready, fight!
Farewell.
But we will let the Pumpkins close us out as our last match of the night between Christy and Honoka. Looks like it's probably a little laggy, but maybe bearable? Hard to say.
Get ready, fight!
Well, with that display from Honoka, this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training this weekend, and good night everyone.